Thank you everyone for joining this morning. This webinar is being recorded and we will send you a playback of it later on once it's all been edited and spliced to make even more wonderful than it already will be. Thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully you've got a brew. The webinar this morning will last approximately half an hour. The plan is to do about 20 minutes conversation with 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you wouldn't mind using the Q&A down the bottom throughout the webinar, we'll answer questions at the end and yeah, we'll take questions from the floor. So I just want to do a bit of an intro about who we are. So as you're aware, around COVID-19, it's impacted a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. Our focus in this series is on health tech and the impact that it's had on health tech and how we've helped people, and hopefully we've been able to give you something which you can deploy on your projects. Today, what we're going to be covering is around rapid feature development and rapid feature shipping. So this morning, you're in the capable hands of Conrad, who works out of our Bristol office, and he's one of our engagement leads, and Gavin, who is one of our product managers, who are going to discuss with you the sort of whys and wherefores of rapid product and feature development in health tech. They have got a significant experience between them. I won't let them steal their thunder. And they are some of the team from BGSS who've been working with the NHS and health tech companies over the last few years, helping them to develop and ship products which are helping in the COVID pandemic at the moment. So at the moment, we have 32 health tech engagements live at the moment, deploying over 270 people across the UK into delivering some of those features and products. So this morning is a product focus. Please do let us know if there's anything else you would like us to cover. We'll be doing another one of these in 2 weeks' time and are going to keep this series rolling. So please let us know what you'd like to see. So without further ado, I will hand over to Gavin and Conrad, who will take you through the session this morning. There's a Q&A at the bottom or wherever it is on your bar, and we'll come back for Q&A in about 20 minutes. So I will leave you in their capable hands.
Thanks, Lawrence. So hi, I'm Gavin Brame, as Lawrence said. So I'm a product manager at BJSS. Why are we here today? So we recognise, as Lawrence said, that things are changing in terms of delivery in a COVID world. I think it's more critical than ever to deliver high quality features, but doing this at great pace without increasing the risk of delivering the wrong thing. So today we're going to spend 10 minutes on two areas, really. One on the define, so this is really about knowing what to build and why you're building what you're building, and on delivery, so making sure that when you know what to build, you end up actually building what you said you would, so sort of the how you go about delivering these things. So we've only got 20 minutes, so without further ado, Conrad, do you want to talk to us about define?
Yeah, hi everybody. I think it's more crucial now than ever, really, that we ensure that the definition phase of any agile delivery has more precision around it than possibly in the past. What we've done for sort of brevity purposes is we've broken this down into two key areas of agile: define and deliver. Within the define phase, we're talking about planning, we're talking about stories, estimation, discoveries, possibly POCs, and all the prioritization that goes with that. What we're seeing around where the precision needs to come in is we're seeing quite a lot of product emphasis around online remote access, so moving away from these kind of traditional analog in-person face-to-face processes and moving more onto an online. So there's lots of product demand in that area. We're also seeing lots of product demand around how we accurately centralize the dissemination of science, so how we get all the facts and figures and share these across different aspects and different areas of the health tech industry. And in order to do that successfully, the clarity of scope, the planning, the detail that goes around the creation of the agile stories, is kind of more critical now than it's ever been before, and there's a lot of aspects that go into that. the communication that we're putting around this, the tooling that we're putting around this, how we structure the process of soliciting requirements and making them into kind of achievable targets, and ensuring we have a very single focus with lots of accountability, feedback, and trust in that process. So, the define plan and prioritization is absolutely paramount. And obviously, what we don't want is we don't want change. Change is inevitable in the agile process. That's all part of it. But we want to try to minimize as much disruption as possible and just let the teams get on with it. Gavin, how in your experience, how have you seen success in the define phase?
So I thought about this in preparation for this, and what really leaps out as being even more important now. And a key area for me is these sort of accelerators, especially in the healthcare space. So when I say accelerators, I think I'm talking about any pattern that's already been established, any good practice that's already established and available to you. I think it's even more important, and it was incredibly important anyway, to be really clear and knowledgeable about what's out there already in the healthcare space. It becomes incredibly complicated when you have many organizations doing roughly similar things, often with wildly different systems. A couple of accelerators that I've used, and I'd encourage everyone to use in my recent history working on a very big healthcare website, was the NHS UK Service Manual. That's one of them. So this essentially is an open source effort to define how you build content strategy, how you build forms, how you interact with users, how you understand all these incredibly important concepts about user interaction, like reading age and all that sort of thing. And that's available for free, and you can contribute to it on GitHub. Similarly, there's a developer portal for the NHS UK, which provides APIs and widgets to syndicate content. All the content on the NHS UK is available to be syndicated on your website. So those are the ones I know about because I've used them, but there are certainly many more. I think it's understanding those accelerators, understanding which ones are robust and aren't sort of not tested, and being cognizant of those in that planning phase, in any planning you're doing, to make sure that you're not relearning lessons, which is always very tempting. And on that theme, I suppose we have other key parts of Scrum that are well worth looking at. We talked about definition of ready, Conrad.
Yeah. So I think just on the accelerators, I don't think it's necessarily only the product accelerators which are crucial. I think there's the onboarding acceleration, there's the provision of tooling, there's a number of if you're using a trusted supplier with a good sort of evidence-based approach, there's a lot of accelerators that we can bring in from resourcing distributed workforce to reusing lots of the principles and very quickly spinning teams up, spinning infrastructure architecture and platforms up, and actually reusing lots of the experience that we've had in the past and kind of moving forward. So accelerators are great in terms of products that we can plug and play with, but then there's the surrounding kind of delivery aspects that we can also accelerate. And I think you alluded there to things like the definitions of ready, the definitions of done. Those can take a lot of time in the process to kind of to get right, and those are really important. Often get left to the least appropriate time. But again, we can leverage experience and say, well, let's not duplicate these. Let's see where we can reconsume information that's been processed through already. And I think it's vital, again, as part of the define and into the deliver phase, that everyone in the team, right through up to the engagement stakeholdership, is involved in that process, so everybody understands, very at very detailed levels, what are we building, and when is it done, and as we know in the agile world, that can often lead to some interesting conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, we put sprint goals on there, and I suppose you don't have to be working in Scrum in sprints, but I think the concept is really valid. I think it's a thing that I've noticed as potentially slipping in some of the projects I'm working on, this very clear view across a team, and as you said, stakeholders of why we're building what we're building, and can
Yeah.
everyone in the team articulate it. So I think that's a really great test of a team. I think if I asked anyone, any particular role, whoever it might be, why are we doing it? And it's not because you told me to, or because I had these stories in sprint planning. It's this outcome for the patient or the customer or whatever is being driven. I think that is quite a good test, and it's only more important now the teams are more diffuse. So I would encourage anyone to test this. If you have sprint goals, which is obviously a good thing, are your team able to articulate them clearly and really understand what they're working on, why they're working on it? And I think it's the same with definition of done. Those are great concepts, but they must be used with a view of, I suppose, the end-to-end journey in mind. They can't just be a sort of development concept.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we know we need to apply our teams and maybe change how our teams are working. So how do we apply our teams in the best way in this new context, Conrad?
Yeah, so I think key to that is leveraging taking advantage of a distributed workforce, a strong skills base, and reusing SME experience within those teams. So we've got quite a broad, Lauren alluded to in the beginning of the session, we have a wide range of ongoing programs of work in health tech. So first and foremost is putting appropriate resource in that gives us a short route to market in terms of the experience that they've gained, and then it's making sure that we've got strong communication, good tooling in place, and that's communication tooling, things like Teams, like Zoom, Slack, all the home-based and remote tool sets, and again we've got accelerators for those, and then really making sure that the scope is absolutely as on ball as it can be, and that everybody is accountable. There's strong feedback loops in the process, and there's a lot of trust as well that needs to come through the teams, and we've got to be cognizant as well in this day and age that often members within these teams are sort of the parent, the teacher, the caregiver, and lastly the worker, and so there's we are in a disruptive environment, so I guess a lot of empathy is required there. And I think if we sprinkle these attributes across the delivery sales, we end up getting the best out of our people, and the key aspect here really is to ensure that we're delivering strong quality on time, and obviously on budget deliverables.
That makes total sense, I think, and I suppose we've touched on some of the areas, so we won't go over them. But I think it's doing more of the really good stuff. I think that I do differently because of COVID. So I think reuse is going to be much more critical.
Yeah.
Things like roles and making sure you've got the right roles in your teams as well strikes me as a really important part of the COVID response. I think I've observed some roles perhaps rolling off in terms of things like product designers and BAs, I think, and other really important roles when it comes to defining what you're going to build and not building the wrong thing. And I think I would really caution against that. I mean, I'd caution against that. I think those roles have always been very important. They are even more important in this case. So in terms of this phase, that's just one watch out I'd have, which is
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think continuity of resources is always been critical, but it's more so now. Because we're spinning up remotely, we're spinning up in isolation implicitly by that, and as soon as you break the chain, it gets quite difficult to kind of bring people in off the edges or move people around. And I think change is one of those things. We want to mitigate as much as possible against change of resource profiles, changes of scope. And I think a lot of that should be solved as long as we've cracked this planning, estimation, prioritization phase. We should have more emphasis then on knowing what needs to be delivered, and we can kind of retain and have a little bit more continuity in the pool of resource.
I think you're absolutely right. So I think conscious that these are topics you can talk about for hours. But let's transition over then. So we talked a little bit about defining, the what and why. But let's move on to talking a little bit about the how, I suppose, or the delivery part of what we're doing. We're seeing big change in the types of projects we're doing in this space, or things the challenges we're seeing in this space. Interoperability, as I mentioned previously, becoming even much more important. Often interoperability between seemingly impossible to get to work together, maybe organizations and silos. Also access to geolocation data and with things like contact details for tracing, in some areas, things that were sacrosanct like GDPR are under strain and being tactically reconsidered, and these are the sort of things we're seeing. So delivery becomes even more critical. So what does successful delivery mean to you in this sense? What tips are there?
Yeah, I think we're in a fail faster world. We were failing fast before, and we're failing even faster now. And I think again, what we're seeing in the patterns here is on the whole, agile delivery is business as usual. We're deploying the same trusted methodologies, using the same evidence base, and as I've said before, what the major changes that we're seeing really is clarity. Clarity and precision of scope. The pace is moving on quite a lot. It was already a disruptive based industry. It's now even more disruptive. There's lots of inputs coming in from startups and from different ideas. There's a lot of ideation going on, and what we need to try to do is kind of take all the good stuff, but try to control it and contain it and execute it in a sort of seamless way. And I think having a strong history in the domain really does help with that.
This is going to be a challenge across the board, isn't it? I think it's that it's failing fast, or however you might frame that, but that idea that you're experimenting, you're trying lots of things, and you're confident that you can do that without having to commit to delivery too early. But I think it's about carving that space and making sure that space exists in a world where everyone's remote. Maybe you may be in the future whole suppliers, whole relationships are established completely remotely. Are you and the teams that you're involved with or suppliers you're working with, have they carved that space to allow for them to confidently say this idea is bad, let's go back to the I think it's as you said, it's doing more of the good stuff, but I think failing fast experimentation is still and will continue to be even more critical.
Yeah, and I think again, the teams that if you've got the right team in that delivery sale or that engagement, again testing each other, testing the principles with everyone, and again, it's got to be stakeholdership all the way down, so that everybody has this holistic view of what's going on. That's also super important at the moment with the time constraints that we're seeing ourselves in. So I guess, how are we applying the teams in terms of delivery at the moment, Gavin, from your perspective?
So the teams I'm in, I think I focused on this, tracking against measurable objectives. Again, no one says they're not doing this, but it's become, even more crucial, I think. So it's, what are your measurable objectives? Do you have a clinically sound evidence base that the things you're measuring are the right things to measure? Have you done enough of this failing fast? Because you might even be failing fast in terms of saying somebody, this is a bad thing to measure. Don't measure this. It sounds great, but don't. That tracking is important, and I think the skill base is important as well. Making sure that people are empowered and they understand what it means to be working in a sort of very empathetic and clinical environment are both things that I really consider when I'm building teams to work on health tech delivery. So that's, I suppose, sort of expanding on things we already do. But what are some key differences that we might see because of COVID in this space, Conrad?
Yeah, I think one of the key things we've lost is the boardroom theatre, the war room theatre. We've moved away from a very personal process of prioritization, using using estimation poker and capturing scope in rooms, lots of diagrams being drawn on walls, and the picture of what the end goal is being sort of quite visual, and very collaborative. And of course, we've moved away now to a lot of this using remote tools, obviously. And it's more crucial now than ever that we make sure that the holistic view of what the end goal is still very clear in people's minds. And we were wholly reliant on these kind of analog processes before. And now it's making sure that we digitize all the visualizations and make sure that people are carried along the journey. So I think, and also obviously I've alluded to before, people are occupying multiple roles now. I mean, they always did before, but it was managed in terms of, you drop the kids at school, and now you've got the distractions, in inverted commas, including myself with a 7-year-old. So, the parent, teacher, caregiver dichotomy that now gets overlaid across the delivery. Those are all big changes that everybody's experienced.
I agree. And I think working in the open there, and that sort of really being cognizant of what will be lost in a remote environment. I think when I think about what was lost for this, it's these, what was the benefit of us putting stuff on walls and having Kanban boards and having things in corridors and post-its up on walls, and they drive a huge amount of benefit, but not to be too theoretical. I mean, there is no water cooler anymore. There is no canteen. But I think that will have an ongoing effect on people's sort of mental model of the type of company they're working for. So, if you're maybe you remember what your company was because you've been working there for 5 years, but a new supplier, simply a supplier team not being on a floor with other teams in the organization, not knowing, oh, that's the person I go and ask about getting the IT equipment sorted. All those innate things that are about understanding the company you're working for, I think, are lost and need to be maintained because they are really meaningful, I think.
Yeah, and I think it sort of loops back then to the whole precision aspect of it, which is before, you could fall back on, oh, I didn't quite listen to everything that was being told in that session. I'll nip back in and have a look at the board before someone wipes it off. Or historically, people would take photos of various whiteboards or agile boards or Kanban boards.
Yeah. And I think with something not to name check a product, but Miro is a good example. There are lots of people are using that now, but it's not the same. It's not the same as a physical board that people will be walking past 100 times a day. You can try and make it the same, but that requires a lot of effort. And I mean, I was just thinking about this when we were speaking previously. I've probably seen 20-30 Miro boards in the last couple of months. How many of them did I really go back and have a good read of because I had a coffee in my hand and I wanted to not go back to my desk? And those things are small, but that could be where the key decisions are not made, or the key advice isn't being sought by those people on the periphery of projects. So got to keep that going.
And I think that there's also, we also have to be cognizant that everyone has to upskill to use these new digital tools. You don't just wake up in the morning and know how to use all of these things. So there's been a huge surge in kind of knowledge building around these various tools. And again, they were a relatively common set of tools, not to name names, that have been used in agile delivery and then program delivery over the years. Who've kind of almost taken a backseat to some of these new kids on the block. And so, there's this huge kind of learning. And again, we have to be cognizant that will introduce a level of disruption within teams.
Indeed. I mean, one other thing, I was just running up to time, but I wanted to say, about showing and telling. I think the show and tell is no more. It couldn't be more important at this point. Is regular, at least probably fortnightly show and tells to the teams and the organisation. Whatever particular size of audience you can muster. But I think things like show and tell, which were incredibly valuable before, I think are almost mandatory now. You've got to assume that no one that's not working in your team knows what your team are doing. So dust off your show and tells, dust off your great presentation prep, start showing the things we canned these 3 experiments this week in the fail fast mode. Do that more, I think.
And crucially, they should be as inclusive as possible, and ideally all the way up to stakeholder level, so that everybody carries the holistic view of what's being done, so there's kind of no surprises at the end.
So thanks, Conrad. So that takes us to time. So we've got 5 minutes now for some Q&A. So let's kick off. Let me just load these questions up. So one that springs to mind is where we're talking a lot about failing fast, but this can be perceived as a negative approach. Can you explain the rationale? What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, everybody loves a bit of, starting a project off and talking about the negative. I mean, it's a key, agile delivery revolves around rapid development and adaptability and continuous improvement. So the concept of failing fast really sort of, relates to presenting the idea of how we try out a piece of approach, be it technical, be it visual, be it documentation. We very quickly try to ascertain whether that is going to have a material positive impact on the future state of the delivery, and if it is, we continue it, and if it's not, then we stop the work on it and we iterate back into another angle of it, really. That constantly going back and double clicking what we're doing ensures that we're not heavily investing in the wrong thing, and that we're making the right investments in the future state, really. And it's a fundamental feedback loop.
I think so.
Probably unfairly named.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an issue with the name sometimes, and I think this is a great example of being user centric with what you call things can yield much better results. So
I think it should be an opportunity to identify different ways of approaching it.
Not quite as off the tongue, but I think it's what's going to work for your management team and your team on the ground. You don't have to use the word fail. It can be, we saved lots of money because we didn't build the wrong thing today, or something like that.
Yeah,
we've got a couple of questions from the floor. Just conscious of time, we've got a couple of minutes left. So one is around whether or not we go from define to build in sprints, and whether or not there's room for enhancements once the product is shipped.
That's a great question. So I think sometimes there's this perception that once the product is done, it's sort of out of the door, there's a great exhalation of breath, everyone's happy, it's sort of done. I think it's so dependent on your local circumstances, but the types of product teams I really like to build and want to build in healthcare are those that you ship the product and that's sort of a start of the journey, really, because as we know, you can get things wrong. You can often iterate and improve based on user feedback that only really comes through once things are being used in a clinical setting or in a clinical way. So I would encourage all teams to not think of shipping the product as the end goal, even if it is it's a product that's iterated over many times or maybe gone through a beta process.
I mean, I think in general in Agile, what you're shipping is a minimum viable product, certainly in many cases. And that then leaves the opportunity to then go in and embellish the product, and again, the idea being that you continuously improve what you've got rather than creating something that becomes stagnant quite quickly.
Absolutely. And there was a second part to that question, which was, how do you do it within sprints? How do you go from define and delivery in sprints? I think there's a couple of ways. I think, perhaps a really way on the side of really effective product teams, I think, are able to do things like dual track, where there are ongoing, just meaningful discovery activities, iterating all the time within a team that's also building their particular product. That's often, that's not universal at all. Maybe it would be great if it was, but I think there's options. I think the important thing for any team is carving that space for discovery-like activities, things that we've talked about in Define, while you're building. The second you take your eye off the ball on that, and you don't carve that space for someone to say, hold on, are we really sure? I've learned a bit more, as you would do in any agile project. That's when I think bad things happen. So
and on that one, it might depend on which agile approach you're using. So whether you're using Kanban or whether you're using more standard, agile approach to delivery will depend on how much of the defining, building, and basically how much parallelization of effort you can get across a specific sprint.
Exactly. Don't scrimp on your designers, your product designers, service designers, interaction designers, user researchers, content designers, any of those. I probably missed many, but don't scrimp on them. You need to have somebody who will be who will be able to clearly articulate if you're going down the wrong path mid-sprint, and are confident to do that, or in whatever methodology you're in.
And just we have got some more questions in, but I think we're around about at time. Any questions that we haven't answered, we will get back to you on. Watch this space for the next one. We'll be putting that up for 2 weeks' time, and we will send around the recording of this session once it's edited and beautiful, and the answers to any questions raised this morning. Do let us know if there's anything else again that you'd like to see. Thanks ever so much for sharing your breakfast with us this morning, and hopefully you found it useful. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.